so we will go ahead and get started. Welcome to Don't Stop at the Stop, Actualizing First and Last Mile Infrastructure. My name is Kelsey Peterson, and I'm a transportation planner with the Palm Beach Transportation Planning Agency, and I'm going to be moderating this session. Before we begin, I want to go over just a few housekeeping items. We will have a question and answer session after the presentation, so please enter your questions for our presenters into the chat box. This session is closed captioning enabled. Please click on the closed caption button in your Zoom toolbar and choose the option to show the live transcript. Additionally, for those who are visually impaired, the session is compatible with NVDA, JAWS, VoiceOver, and Android TalkBack screen readers. If you have questions related to any technical issues, please use the chat and someone from our team will do their best to help you resolve them. And I'm now excited to introduce our speakers. Fred Jones is a Senior Associate and Planning Practice Lead with Michael Baker International. Prior to joining Michael Baker, Fred served as a Senior Transit Planner with the Jacksonville Transportation Authority. Mr. Jones sits on the National Complete Streets Coalition Steering Committee as part of Smart Growth America and currently serves as Vice Mayor of the City of Neptune Beach, Florida, which was recognized as having one of the best complete streets policies of 2018. Fred's most interesting transit experience was riding the 15L from North Broadway in downtown Denver east to Aurora along Colfax Avenue, which provided one of the most diverse multicultural foodie experiences. Next, we have Gabe Matthews, who has 12 years of experience in transportation and transit planning in both the private sector and public sectors. She currently serves as the Transit Research, Planning, and Computer Programs Administrator for the Florida Department of Transportation. She and her team are responsible for providing transit technical support, research, training, and policy guidance to Florida's transit agencies, FDOT staff, and other transportation agencies. Gabe's favorite transit experience is using JTA's Skyway for its scenic views of the St. Johns River in downtown Jacksonville. Last but not least, we have Jeff Widener with Marlin Engineering. Jeff has 36 years of experience as a professional transportation planner in Southeast Florida, working for both private consulting firms and for government agencies. Jeff was the first Alert Today, Alive Tomorrow champion for FDOT District 4 and is passionate about pedestrian and bicycle safety. His favorite transit experience is using North America's oldest subway system in Boston and taking the Green Line to Kenmore Square for a Red Sox game at Fenway Park. As a reminder, if you have questions or if you're experiencing technical issues, please use the chat. We have staff monitoring the chat and we'll do our best to get to as many questions as possible during the Q&A at the end. And with that, I'll turn things over to our speakers.
Thank you so much, Kelsey. We're all very excited to be here. Let me start off saying that there's no someone we won't miss. Debatable, but it's true. In this journey, we all have a role. Every life counts on you knowing yours. My role is the project manager for the project we are discussing today, and the overall role for the Florida Department of Transportation is to move the needle for improvements for safety, mobility, and innovation, and to move it on reaching Vision Zero. We want everyone, regardless of age, ability, income, race, ethnicity, to have safe, comfortable, and convenient access to community destinations and public places, like everywhere. Whether walking, driving, bicycling, or taking public transportation, we want to create an uncomplicated relationship with travel for everyone. Now, recognizing the state's reputation for pedestrian and cyclist injuries and fatalities, there is a growing body of research focused on identifying the patterns, causality, and issues surrounding this public health matter. For transit users who primarily access bus networks as pedestrians or cyclists, the development of policies, strategies, and countermeasures to meaningfully address the design, location, and characteristics of stops and stations is absolutely imperative. And that is what we attempted to achieve through our Safe Access to Transit study. And I'd like to thank Michael Baker International and Marlin Engineering for their great work on this. And next slide. I would also like to thank our transit agency contributors, including Broward County Transit, Tri-Rail, Indian River, Jacksonville Transportation Authority, Palm Tran, Gainesville RTS, and also FDOT Alert Today, Alive Tomorrow. Without you, we couldn't have done this. And if I missed anyone, you are still awesome, and thank you so much. And also thank you to FTA for the money. Now over to Fred.
Thank you so much, Gabe. I'd like to begin with sharing some voices that we think reflect the transit experience in the state of Florida.
I think it's important that there should be more crossovers like they have in other parts of town for the mothers that are either i.e. expecting or that have young children that they just can't, young children can't, and the mother can't get all her kids out of harm's way. And, you know, it's a dangerous,
yet they're trying to get to their destination quickly, so they're just going to cross.
And I worry, yeah, it's the mothers with children I worry about the most.
Start again. What's your name?
Aaliyah.
Aaliyah. What would you do to make your transit experience better?
Just be a little bit more accurate with time.
Mm-hmm.
Like, just come on time, because some people have jobs, they have to go to interviews and stuff. There's always late. So time would be better. It would be a good thing for it to.
Awesome. Do you have anything to say? What would you do? Are you sure?
Okay.
Those of us who can, you know, the shortest.
So a diagonal walk.
Yeah, the shortest distance between 2 points is
A straight line.
I hope that sort of illustrated to you guys some of the concerns that transit riders experience every day at the bus stop. You heard the first gentleman talk about mothers with children as they're navigating on their way to the stop. You heard about time, that sensitivity, being able to get to your job or whatever appointment on a regular basis reliably. And the last thing, which I thought was just so powerful, Sherwin, who was a retired police officer, said it really is about the shortest distance between 2 points. And that's what people are trying to do. And you see this little quote here to the left out of the FHWA Pedestrian Hybrid Beacon Guide. You know, we really focus so much on the delay tolerance at traffic signals for vehicles. But when you talk about somebody that's walking and biking, they also have a similarly reduced delay tolerance. And so I think really what this study is about is how do we really address improved accessibility and transit to the transit stops. Next slide. You may have seen examples like this in your community. I mean, depending where you're at, you see these a lot all over the state. You know, from the transit agency perspective, we do talk a whole lot about on-time performance, reliability, stop facilities, and especially now, because we've been focusing the last couple of years on improving the system as a whole, you know, through route optimization initiatives and system redesign. There's been this total, you know, discussion now on how do we improve first and last mile? Do we use Uber as the solution? And really what this does is it illustrates the fact that pedestrians and cyclists that are coming there, what is happening in that first and last mile. It's no longer simply about having a 10 by 30 ADA accessible pad, but the access and egress and the experience to the transit stop. Next slide. And so to us, and we talk a whole lot in the industry about improving customer service and the experience. We really believe, and I think that's part of essential part of this study, is that accessibility to transit is really about the customer experience. And it's probably, if not more so, just as important as service delivery and on-time performance. And how can transit agencies take a more pronounced role in improving these types of outcomes and improving the conditions for their core customer base. Next slide. So again, why does this matter? And what I'd like to talk a little bit about today, when you're going to hear, it's not about good design. There's been so much research and publications that are aimed at addressing safety issues near stops, or how to design a really well-designed transit stop, or what are the best practices. But really, one of the things that we found is conspicuously absent in this study is what are the guidance and protocols regarding the roles and responsibility, the oversight of ensuring that we're getting good outcomes when it comes to safe, accessible transit networks. And I'll use this term over and over. It's really about how do we institutionalize first and last mile access to transit. And this is not to say that there aren't places, especially in our own state, that aren't doing a good job at coordinating and ensuring that we try to get favorable outcomes. But far too often, we're seeing a great deal of inconsistency in this space. And so what we really seek to talk about is how do we clarify those roles and responsibilities to ensure that we're improving outcomes for all. Just as a background, to us, this is a fundamental equity and a human dignity issue. The customers that we are serving, those in fact are often lower income, they're older adults, they're communities of color, and really in our state, that's really a significant proportion of the transit customer base, yet they are also the ones that are disproportionately, as Gabe had mentioned, making up the vast majority of the fatalities and injuries that we're seeing on our roadways. Other things that we start to find out, next slide, is that in the last 30, 40 plus years, we're seeing a lot of the corridors, the higher speed suburban and older urban arterials are actually declining in their traffic volumes. And yet, so we're seeing this undercapacity situation, but at the same time, we're seeing this is where people are taking the bus, and this is where we're seeing a high prevalence of fatalities and injuries. Next slide. And I would be remiss if I didn't talk about this also in the context of enforcement. I think what we've seen is that there has been a tremendous negative implication of relying solely on enforcement and a lack of understanding of what we consider the very complex laws that are governing the Florida statutes under Chapter 316130. And what we'd like to do is minimize this over-reliance on enforcement and sort of look at saying, can we get the police out of this and have less of this inconsistent application of the pedestrian laws, and where we're seeing communities of color and certain groups being disproportionately affected and impacted here. A few years ago, there was a piece called Walking While Black that ProPublica has put out. It's an award-winning piece, and I encourage folks to read it, but it really highlights where the negative implications of relying on enforcement, particularly for folks that may be accessing the transit system. Next slide. Yet I'd say we do know how to get this right. As I mentioned earlier, we do know how to design good facilities, both on the public side, and next slide, on the private side. This here is a Walgreens on Commercial Boulevard in South Florida. In this particular case, they, as even a private sector entity, recognizes who their customer base is, and they've actually went ahead and designed the facilities to make sure, knowing that folks, when they alight from the bus, they're going to be able to safely access their stores. So it's really not about not knowing how to do it or how to design it, but it's this lack of uniformity in the execution. Next slide. And again, I think it's really important to note the last 10 years have really provided a renaissance in thinking about safety and pedestrianism, whether it's just the terminology complete streets, but the movement around Vision Zero and all of the guidance, the NACTO publications have really raised the specter on safety and are really providing innovative solutions in this. Yet we still continue to see some of the same problems on the ground, especially when it comes to transit access. Next slide. So in talking with Gabe a little bit, I think it's important to talk a little bit about the genesis of this particular study. Next slide. And there were two pieces of salient research that focused, one focused on stop placement and the other really focused on the demographic analysis of the pedestrian experience and safety issues. And I think they really gave us kind of a good start, but it sort of left us wondering, you know, what's more? We cannot, the first study on transit stop location, unfortunately, next slide, really focused on some pedestrian crashes in Broward and Palm Beach County, but I think one of the things we focused is that it was too much on behavior and enforcement and education. There's a lot of discussion about jaywalking and the various solutions to address that. Next image here. So we see some of this. We also see some countermeasures, which are often the best ideal for given how people travel. This is Oakland Park Boulevard, where we're seeing folks utilize a fence barrier. I've seen these in Northeast Florida as well. And I was looking at one the other day and it actually had wire cutters with it. So they're letting people go through it. So we're recognizing this isn't an effective tool. And lastly, this picture here was, next slide or next click, was we've seen a lot of focus on, you know, campaigns, which I think kind of get us into that space of victim blaming as well. And finally, the last image showcases a picture in Lee County where troopers were actually handing out neon vests as a solution to create greater awareness for pedestrian and cyclist safety. So the thought process being if they wear these bright vests, no matter where they're going, the cars will see them and they'll reduce their chances of being in a fatal accident. But, you know, that left us thinking, you know, is this over-reliance on enforcement and education and human factors the real most effective solution to address this issue? And we believe that it's not the case. So we started having some transit agency discussions. Next slide. And, you know, we said, let's talk to some of these agencies that we've described here early in the slide deck. But one of the things that we started hearing is that a lot of times they don't know what to do. They have limited authority. They don't really have a seat at the table. Sometimes they may be simply a commenting agency when it comes to a site development review or a roadway permitting job. And so I think, you know, what are we supposed to do in terms of, or maybe at times they're involved way too late. So they felt a little bit of a disadvantage when it comes to that space that goes beyond the pads and shelters, because they felt like fundamentally maybe it's not within their purview and maybe they don't have the expertise or the engineering capacity to address. Next slide. A lot of this, you know, again, we sort of distilled this down to 6 key areas. You know, there's infrastructure and amenities. These are some of the things that we've seen. A lack of regulatory authority in the space. Sometimes it boils down to communication. We know funding is an issue, but it was just quite apparent that it was more than just, we don't know how to design a good stop or we can't get it out there. There's something to do with coordination and collaboration, which of course, you know, we as planners, we seem to do a really good job. We talk about that, yet at the same time, it's not happening. And so next slide. And of course, what we start to see is this typical scenario, you know, a city, county, public works departments responsible for certain pieces of the infrastructure, the sidewalks, the crossings. A private sector may think about doing a shelter or sidewalks if it's part of a development agreement. The DOT often is the one that's maintaining the right of way, the pavement markings, and the transit agency is really seems to be more focused in on that footprint around the shelter. But this real access and egress, which we know really begins on private property, is where often we see the deficiencies happening. So after these conversations, next slide, some of the common problems, in addition to funding, were sort of these 4 things like who's responsible, why is it so complex to get this done? I may not even have an understanding of it. There's some places that are integrated into site development review processes and do a good job. And there's other transit agencies that don't even know where to begin. And outside of, we put a pole in the ground, it's sort of on your own and they don't maybe have the capacity to deal with that. And so, you know, again, this isn't a magical thing. It's how can we start to improve this a little bit? And so this sort of lead us as we kind of conclude here, this discussion, next slide, which is really, we're framing this around opportunities to look at improving this. And I think it's really two components. One, we see that there's a fundamental pre-planning, pre-screening exercise that agencies and entities can engage in that can really hone in and identify problem areas before they become a problem, so that these don't become an afterthought when it comes to accessibility. And the other thing is that we've got such great technology now, especially around improved data collection with videos and smartphones, that there really isn't a reason why we don't know what's happening from a granular perspective. And I'm going to turn it over to Jeff Widener now, who's going to talk about some of these new tools with respect to non-motorized data collection and this sort of case study in South Florida and what it revealed. Jeff?
Well, first of all, thank you, Gabe, for allowing us to work together on this project. And thank you, Fred, very inspiring. I'm Jeff Widener with Marlin Engineering, and I wanted to share with you an innovative approach to data collection for the planning and design of safe access to transit stops. You know, information is knowledge, knowledge is power. And all of that information and power has been with the roadway designers and planners because we've only been collecting traffic data for decades. The DOT is now deploying the first statewide non-motorized pedestrian bicycle system, one of the few in the country. In the last 2 years, we've been able to install 3 continuous counters in Dade, Broward, Palm Beach, and 23 short-term 2-week counts. We were working with Gabe's office to expand this deployment to include the integration of the interface with transit. Next slide, please. So we developed a prototype deployment. Jesse, can you go back one click? I just want to share. In order to collect data across the facility, this is the FHWA term for automobile traffic. So we want to be in the same ball game, but we wanted to collect information on both sides of the street. If you look at the bottom center, we had infrared devices facing towards the sidewalk to collect information on the sidewalk, pneumatic tubes in the bike lanes. And then if you look top center, we had the same setup on the other side of the street. Click once, Jesse. So the pneumatic tubes are fine if you have bike lanes, but in a shared circumstance, it has a lot of difficulty telling a difference between a bike and an automobile. The infrared devices on the sidewalk have issues because they can't differentiate between a bike or a person. It just knows something went by me. Adding the video, though, allows us to validate the bicycle counts in the bike lanes and develop a ratio or a calibration factor for pedestrians and bicycles on the sidewalk. So I just want to share with you some of the video and the data that we collected. This is the Galleria Mall on Sunrise Boulevard. This is a bus stop about 500 feet from a signalized intersection. And we're on a GIF loop here. The videos didn't work so well, but I think you can see what's happening here. People are using the bus stop, using the sidewalks, but they are crossing straight across the street. There's another a Publix across the street, a large commercial facility. And just like Fred said, people are just following a straight line. If you hit the button, Jesse, this video detection software, the upper left shows red lines are bicycles. If you provide a bike lane, people will use it. On the right, we see the yellow lines represent and track all of the pedestrian movements. You can see the pedestrians using the sidewalks, using the access into the Galleria Mall on the right. But when it comes to the street, they're just going straight, diagonal, all over the place. Clearly, we see a need here to look at the potential for a mid-block crossing. The roll-up of all the data and the breakdown is provided on the generic deployment graphic. We have a total of 343 pedestrians and bicycles on the right side of the road and 237. These are really good numbers. And typically we've been looking at peds and bikes only at the signalized intersections. I think this provides insight to how the corridor operates and how the transit riders are accessing the bus stop. Next slide. And we're just going to share with you some other locations. So Tri-Rail Station in Opelika, gentleman walking across the street. In the loop, you'll see this person here using the roadway as a kiss and ride facility. Again, when we click and go to the data report, on the left, you can see we have bike lanes, and actually it looks like more bicycles are riding in the decorative buffer. And then when we look on the upper right, we can see the lack of pedestrian facilities and bicycles and pedestrians accessing the Tri-Rail Station really from all directions. In the bottom, we had a total of 652 train boarders at this location, and 142 of those were on the same side of the street. So that's a nice ratio of people walking to a train station. Next slide. This is the access to the Boynton Beach Tri-Rail Station. We have very wide sidewalks here, no bike lanes. If you watch the gentleman in the bicycle on the bottom, and he'll roll up again, we actually see a little road rage event. It looks like he met the driver of the vehicle turning right and was unhappy with it, but actually he was driving on the wrong side of the street. But, again, like Fred was saying, it's not, what is the role? The role of the user is there all, but we also need to provide the proper infrastructure. And as we see here in the data report, click please, Jesse, that when you provide shared use paths on both sides of the road, the bicyclists and the pedestrians will use those facilities. Next slide, please. This is a transfer hub in Indian River County. It was designed for transfers from bus to bus. However, there's a Publix across the street and people were using it as a destination stop, and there are no pedestrian facilities. If you look at the data report, next slide, Jesse. I'll go back, yeah, here. So you'll see clearly people are using this as a destination stop to utilize the commercial facilities across the street. Maybe not enough pedestrians. This is 24 hours worth of information, but at least some kind of a facility to accommodate the activity that is occurring. Next slide. This is the first stop in the morning, 6:30 in the morning in February. It's dark in Southeast Florida. There was no lighting at this stop, and it was sort of an aha moment for the transit provider that, we really need to provide some lighting at this location. We also recognized here, you can see people are kiss and riding at this facility, and there was no provision for kiss and ride. We believe video is the future for data collection. It's getting less expensive, and it's just as important to look what's happening mid-block as it is to as looking at signalized intersections. Next slide. This is just sharing, this is one of the busiest transfer locations on street in Southeast Florida. We're seeing people walking in front of buses. Again, though, this transfer location will have north-south to east-west transfers with 2 minutes in between buses. A lot of these people are going to work and they're in a rush. We need to provide better operations and better facilities for our transit patrons. And with that, we'll turn it back to, well, these are just some of the comments we received when we sat down with the transit agencies, obviously indicating the need for mid-block crossings, lighting, potential kiss and ride facilities. And now I'll turn it back to Fred to wrap it up.
Thanks, Jeff. And these next two slides, they're pretty busy, but I think it's really important to share from, Jeff really talked about our ability to know what's happening on the ground now, but it's taking it to the next step and saying, what are the policy and regulatory mandates or changes that we really need to do to institutionalize accessibility and maintain safe, accessible networks for our customers. And I think this is really about actions. And what we show here is, we sort of hypothesize that there's various different things happening within the space and the threshold of distance from the stops. And sort of what are the ingredients that happen within those various influence areas and who should be sort of involved. So we tried to kind of conceptualize this graphically for folks to say all of the details. And at least what this begins to do is show that there's a lot of things that are taking place beyond just the need to provide a 10 by 30 pad with a garbage can and maybe a shelter. And all of this discussion around, who is responsible for the infrastructure. Sometimes you'll see the pad put up, and unfortunately we're waiting for the private developer to complete the sidewalk. And our thought process here is that's probably just not good enough. And I will also say that it's not a matter of just good policy, it's a matter of legal issues, because case law over the last 10 or 15 years, particularly tort liability claims, have held that transit agencies can be held liable for access and egress. There's cases in California, SEPTA in Pennsylvania, where transit riders disembarking from the stop were run over, killed, and there may have not either mid-block or because there wasn't appropriate sidewalk. And it wasn't an issue of the jurisdiction, but the transit agency was also held responsible. And so I think that's why it's important that they have an important or at least a more pronounced role at the table. The next slide. And our thought process is here too, is that, this should be part of, and I take this, Jeff and I, we use this term regular order of business. You go and get a development permit, you go and get a road project done, whether it's site or land development review, there is a very prescriptive process, no matter where you're at in a jurisdiction or county, that you have to go through in order to advance to be able to get a certificate of occupancy or some permit. And so we think that there's an ability to integrate transit access as part of this, and not just to be, part of the sort of cycle of agency comments. I used to sit on the other side and make comments about the placement of stops, but it didn't necessarily mean that it was going to get done once it got through site plan review at the host city. So the idea here is to say, can we start to identify locations, develop screens that really warrant a more detailed look at the conditions that lead up to the stops? And again, we can't have a scenario we have technically compliant ADA stops, but then we don't have technically compliant ADA access. And so I think it's really important here to think about that. I know this is a lot going on, but this is the part of business that you do when you go get any type of project that gets built. And if we're requiring developers to focus on where they're going to put the dumpster on the site, or you have to run an auto turn for a truck access to know where the driveway is going to be, or if you can get a certain size into there, we need to be thinking about what it means for the customers that access your location via transit. And the last slide here, kind of full circle. We really need to think about this. I've had discussions, Billy Hadaway and I have talked about this before, is that there's a real need to revisit, this chapter 316. There's parts of this that were written 40 plus years ago that predate the infrastructure, the high capacity, higher speed arterial infrastructure that we have today that transit users are having to deal with. And so I think we have to start looking about that and to clarify what's a legal mid-block movement. There's a lot of misinformation and it's very complex when you read it. So to put this in the hands of an individual police officer to make the decision to write a ticket, it's very problematic. So our thought process here is also to kind of form a committee to really start thinking about how we could pilot a project to have an intentional discussion about how we can improve these things. And I'll wrap up here in conclusion. I said earlier, this is a huge equity and dignity issue. You've probably seen today in some of these sessions, we've got a lot of great complete streets where walking is an alternative, but we've got a lot of incomplete streets where people have no choice but to walk as they access their system. So I look forward to the questions, and hopefully we can move the needle in the right direction in this space. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you all for that great presentation. We've had a lot of questions coming into the chat, so I'm going to dive right in and we'll try and get through as many as possible. The first question was for Fred. It says, Fred, you indicated a preference for reduced enforcement. Were you pointing to pedestrian behavior? We have seen the need for increased enforcement for vehicles coupled with greater education for pedestrians. Your thoughts?
I think there's always going to be a role for enforcement, but I think there's been an over-reliance on it. And some of the research that had come out basically said it's all attributed to jaywalking and the like. I think we've got to somehow bridge that gap a little bit and recognize that there is an engineering and a design solution that might reduce the need for enforcement. So I think it's always going to be part of the equation, but it shouldn't be the vast majority of our response to it.
And this is Gabe. There's a second part to that comment that you didn't. I agree that there is an increased need for enforcement for vehicles and education for pedestrians. And, you know, there's got to be a process for this. I mean, one of the things we need to do is start at the beginning, where we start teaching, instead of driver education in schools, we teach road user education, so they have a holistic picture of what every user's responsibility is. You know, there's a lot of ignorance to what the actual responsibilities are for pedestrians. I mean, on both the pedestrian and the driver side. And so, you know, that's one step we need to take.
Great, thanks. So the next question we have is for Jeff, and it's, how do we choose bus stops for these case studies?
Well, you know, every street has its own story. You know, we shared with you some major roadways, and I think you can clearly see that from some of the videos, particularly the one on Sunrise Boulevard, there's over 150 mid-block crossings at this one point location. There are two alternatives. Perhaps we move the bus stop a little bit further west, or we implement a mid-block pedestrian crossing. It's in a dense commercial area with dense commercial on both sides of the street. But, you know, we finally have the data. I mean, when we've been collecting data, you know, recently over the last 5 or 6 years, it's become normal or institutionalized to collect pedestrian bicycle data in the crosswalks, but not mid-block. I see the future of corridor studies blanketing them with video cameras. The cost is coming down. And just, you know, the insight of watching the videos on Fast Forward and getting a data report of the patterns that are occurring opens eyes to multiple opportunities and multiple options. I hope I answered the question.
That's great, thank you. A somewhat related question is, in addition to consideration of mid-block crossings, is there a consideration of relocating the bus stops closer to the intersection with the signalized crosswalk?
Yes.
Great.
Yes, I mean, and I think that I would totally agree. I think a lot of times the placement sometimes happens at an afterthought. We've seen examples here in Northeast Florida where you're going, my gosh, the Walmart was constructed. Why didn't we just move the stop back to where or adjust this, knowing where the bus stop was going to be, match the signal to it so that people could have a safe, you know, far side boarding and alighting process. But again, I just think, again, it really gets back to that initial quote that I showed that, you know, if you think about as a pedestrian that you might have to walk up 3 to 10 minutes out of your way to cross the street. If I told vehicles we were going to add 3 minutes to a signal, that I don't think they would tolerate that.
Yeah, and I want to go, you know, the slide that shows the first 50 feet, the first 100 feet, the first 200 feet. You know, when we developed this graphic, it all came out of the discussion of, you know, we expect people to walk 500, 600 feet to a traffic signal to go 100 feet across the street. That is way outside of the perspective of the user of the bus stop. And there's a lot of talk, first mile, last mile. You know, we want to look at the first 50, 100, and 200 feet, because that's where the safety, comfort, and convenience comes in for the, are daily users of the roadway for transit.
Great, thank you. So another question, oh, sorry, did you have more? Okay, so another question is, the amount of people crossing mid-block seems to show that the problem is with the roads being designed with too much priority for cars. Please elaborate on how traffic calming and other controls on motor vehicles can help improve the environment for pedestrians and bicycles to conveniently reach their destinations.
Fred, you want to start, or?
Yeah, I mean, I do. I think that's a good, keen observation. I mean, I think there are definitely countermeasures. I mean, we've got to look, we're starting to see more, pedestrian hyperbeacon and hawk signals being brought in. If we think, like I say, Jeff showed this great example. I mean, when you have a shopping center, a Publix across the street from a high frequency, high ridership bus stop, people, is there an opportunity to look at having an improved countermeasure, a dedicated mid-block crossing there that would, reduce the propensity for people to get hurt?
Yeah, and I would just add, we shared with you stops that were on the state highway system. And, that was the role of our project, to look at and collect data for the state of Florida. But, every street needs to be calmed, particularly in our highly urbanized areas. And all of the tools that are available to make transit more comfortable and convenient, and make our roadways better adaptable for vulnerable users is a good thing. So I don't think anything we presented precludes complete streets and calming treatments.
All right, this next question, I believe, is referring to the chart, Fred, that you showed on one of the last slides. And it's, where do you imagine community advocacy groups fitting into the flow chart?
That was an excellent question.
Yeah, that's really good. I think, and Gabe and Jeff, please chime in here. I mean, I think our thought process here is that this is the beginning of having a conversation, a more robust conversation, convening sort of a working group. The DOT has some really great initiatives around pedestrian and cyclist safety, and Vision Zero is now being embedded into the culture. So I do think that, it doesn't have to be an overly onerous process here. I think our thought process here is that, is there an opportunity, or do we know right offhand where there's going to be maybe the potential for, a lot of transit users, and we might have some problems, and have that sort of discussion. And I think, not only the transit agencies, but maybe there is an opportunity to have some community groups, that are involved in having a seat at the review table as part of this process.
Yeah, I agree 100%. When I saw that question, I thought, wow, what a great idea. And that's why we're here, is to share our ideas. We were focused on agencies and agency roles, but again, institutionalizing the development of a comprehensive process that makes this a regular order of business certainly deserves community input.
And I'll just comment on that. I mean, like, recently we did a study with Florida International University to look at how transit agencies and the development community reached out to older adults in Broward and Miami-Dade counties. And there was like a total disconnect. They're building these communities for people who probably don't drive anymore, and yet there's no transit stop in front of them. And this is a huge deal, and absolutely we have to have community advocacy groups that work for our special populations.
Great. So we are just about at time, so I think we will have to wrap up now. Thank you all so much for your great questions, and thank you to our wonderful speakers for a great presentation and discussion. Before you go, there's a link to the evaluation form in the chat box. Please take a minute to share your thoughts on today's session. Additionally, there's a link to the Safe Street Summit People's Choice Award, where you can cast your vote for your favorite complete streets efforts in Miami-Dade, Broward, and or Palm Beach. Thank you so much, and I hope you all enjoyed the session and that you all enjoy the rest of the Safe Street Summit.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everybody.